What's up, everybody? Look at that. Your first look at quarterback Matt Ryan in a Colts jersey. That is art right there. Just incredible work. I'm Jesse Cofield. Lots to talk about today. The never-ending quarterback carousel of the NFL offseason. I've got DraftKings contributors Jeff Ulrich and Steve Buchanan here to break it down with me. Big trade going down yesterday, boys, as you can see from that beautiful piece of art. The Atlanta Falcons traded quarterback Matt Ryan to the Colts for a third-round pick in this year's draft. So how do you like the fit for Matt Ryan's fantasy potential? Now, Ryan did thrive in a play-action heavy offense under former Falcons offensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan. And during that season, Atlanta won the NFC. So now he's got weapons like Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman. Like, Steve, how do we feel about this?
Yeah, speaking of beautiful art, you look great today.
Oh, my God.
But let's
Thank
talk
you.
about Matt Ryan going to the Colts, this revolving carousel of quarterbacks that this team has endured since Andrew Luck shockingly announced his retirement. It's Jacoby Brissett. What? It's Carson Wentz. What? It's Matt Ryan. Look, Matt Ryan is not going to be the long-term option here either. He is approaching 40. He's getting up there, 37, 38, I think, to begin the season. And it's not like he exactly has a plethora of weapons at his disposal. You mentioned Jonathan Taylor. You mentioned Michael Pittman. You stopped after that. That wasn't on purpose because I guarantee you can't name 2 or 3 other wide receivers left on that team. This is going to be a team that once again relies upon Jonathan Taylor heavily. And why wouldn't you? Because look at how much of the success they had last year. They just couldn't overcome the Jaguars, and that basically knocked them out of the playoffs. There's not much is going to change here. I do say there is an upgrade with Matt Ryan. He is going to be able to throw downfield better than Carson Wentz, but we're not talking about a lot of receivers that he has at his disposal. So I'm not considering this much of an upgrade, but really anything is an upgrade at this point over Carson Wentz.
Jeff, Matt Ryan is 36 years old, but he will be 37 on May 17th.
He's basically dead, Jesse.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
He's absolutely ancient for the NFL, not for the earth, but for the NFL.
This could be, Matt Ryan was pretty bad last year. We'll just start there, especially for fantasy purposes. I think he had 1 week where he had, depending on the scoring, he had over 20 fantasy points. So expectations for his fantasy potential should certainly be tempered. You're also putting him on a Colts team who passed the ball the 6th fewest times last year. They had the 6th fewest explosive pass plays downfield. This isn't an offense, as Steve alluded to, that has a plethora of weapons where they're just going to be chucking it down the field. This is a team that wants to run the ball. The nice thing for Matt Ryan is that he's going to be playing behind a good offensive line. He's going to have a running back who's just going to take the rock from him and take a bunch of pressure off. So there are going to be play option opportunities. And it's going to be interesting to see. This could be an indictment on Carson Wentz here. If Matt Ryan can bounce back and throw 30-plus touchdowns, maybe go over 4,000 yards in a lower volume pass offense, it's going to kind of show you just how the difference between even the carcass of Matt Ryan versus Carson Wentz in his prime. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm not super bullish on Matt Ryan this year. I think this move for the Colts is far better in real life. I think you're getting the leadership potential of Matt Ryan, a guy who can game manage in the playoffs better and get them that big win over Jacksonville when they actually needed it. So not really looking to draft Matt Ryan, to be honest. I think he will bounce back a bit, but this is more of a real-life move for the Colts, and I think it will pay off.
Okay, what about the Colts' odds to win the division? They're tied for first best odds with the Titans to win the AFC South, sitting at plus 120, Jeff.
Yeah, and this is where I think that the Matt Ryan news has more effect for me. I think the Colts should actually be favored here. And everyone who watches this show knows I like me some Tennessee Titans futures, but not this year. I think the Colts have proven, they not only did they add Matt Ryan, but they added Yannick Ngakoue on the defensive line as well. That goes along with DeForest Buckner. This team is primed on the O-line and the D-line here. And now they've added a veteran force at QB who, I think is going to be in the perfect situation. You mentioned the chemistry with the offensive coordinator as well, and just having that O-line and running back. So I actually look at the Colts, and I think you will see these odds eventually swing in the Colts' favor once people sort of start to put the 2 and 2 together here. And they just realize that the Titans, their big addition is a guy who's coming off an ACL surgery on offense. So I like the Colts right now, even at plus 120. I think this division is wide open for them to take hold of next year.
Steve, do you like the real-world value of this trade better? How do we feel here?
Yeah, I'm just writing down a note to myself. Take a bet against Jeff. His analysis was horrible. The Titans are the team in this division. Are you kidding me? Like, come on. If Jonathan Taylor goes down, so does the entire team. They have absolutely nothing unless they pull a couple rabbits out of the hat during the draft. This team is thin as rails. Then you have the Titans, who are most likely going to be drafting some defensive help. That was the biggest glaring need for the Titans last season. They needed some quarterbacks. They needed some defensive backs. They need somebody to stop the pass. They're going to rectify that during the draft. They already brought in Robert Woods, who's going to be a very nice compliment to A.J. Brown. And then, oh, by the way, they also have that running back who was injured most of the season. His name is Derrick Henry. He's going to be ripped roaring to go as well. That is going to be an offense to fear in that division. I don't know what Jeff's talking about. He's not in his normal place. Maybe he's a little confused. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what team he's talking about. But I will absolutely say that they should not be the same odds. The Titans are absolutely winning the division this year.
All right, let's talk about the other side of this trade. Marcus Mariota's fantasy value with the Falcons, or not the other side of the trade, just who ended up with the Falcons. He's reunited with Arthur Smith. Is this where we see Mariota flourish? I mean, the Falcons have Kyle Pitts, who they drafted last year, but they did just lose Calvin Ridley to that one-year suspension, Steve.
Boy, I mean, what a segment. Like, so many great things to talk about here, right? Marcus Mariota, now the quarterback for the Falcons. Who does he have to go to? I know Cordell Patterson is coming back. That's good news. There's Kyle Pitts, but they lost Calvin Ridley. They lost Russell Gage. He's with the Buccaneers now. So where are they going to go here, right? Like, maybe they rely upon, Marcus Mariota to do more with his legs. Like, we did see some nice plays from him on his limited role when he was with the Raiders. I mean, he's only still 28 years old. He can still, he's still a capable young quarterback in this day and age. But man, the pickings are extremely thin. We talked about how there's no pickings in the Colts offense. There's not much here with the Falcons either as well. I assume they're going to draft a quarterback in the draft too as well, because I don't see Mariota as being the long-term option here. It's a one-year contract with an option in the next year, so there's really not much incentive there. I just don't see where Mariota is going to find success in this offense when they're most likely going to be using Cordell Patterson as their number one weapon overall, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it's after Patterson, boy, does it get thin real quick.
Yeah, Jeff, Atlanta signed Mariota to a 2-year deal, reportedly for $18.7 million. Like, how do we feel about this? Do you think they're going to sign a quarterback in the draft, or do you think they're going to be like, let's try and develop Mariota here?
Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the things we're going to have to look at, obviously, Jesse. I mean, like, is Mariota even in line to start all 17 games? That's a big factor. But I do look at this situation as the exact opposite of the Matt Ryan situation. This is potentially a very good fantasy landing spot for Marcus Mariota, and you should be keeping an eye on him like late in season-long fantasy drafts. Look, it was only 2 years ago. Jalen Hurts took over for Carson Wentz on a terrible Eagles squad, and what did he do? He basically won people some leagues, at the end of the year. He won people millions of dollars on DraftKings, likely, because of the big fantasy games he put up with his legs. Marcus Mariota is going to be behind most games. Even just looking at how much Matt Ryan threw versus Carson Wentz last year, he threw 60 times more on Atlanta. It's going to be the same thing for Marcus Mariota. This team does not have a good defensive line. They were like last in sack rate last year. Marcus Mariota is going to be dropping back a ton. They are going to have him use his legs more, in my opinion, because that's the strongest part of his game. And they just don't have any wide receivers. So I actually look at this as a very good fantasy landing spot for Marcus Mariota. It's going to be ugly. There'll probably be a couple games where he just looks terrible and they get shut out or something. But the flip side of that is they're in a weak division. When they play weaker opponents, I think Mariota will put up some very big fantasy numbers. And I'm pretty bullish on him if he gets that starting job as like someone with a late round to use on a late round quarterback selection, especially if you're into that kind of thing and waiting on QBs in fantasy drafts.
All right, thanks, you two. Good stuff. Great way to open the show. On to the NBA after this quick break. Back here on The Sweat, I'm joined by DraftKings contributor Matt Meiselman and RotoWire's Nick Whalen, here to give a sportsbook and DFS preview of tonight's relatively small 4-game slate in the NBA. So, Matt, who are you paying up for in your DFS lineups tonight?
So I think that most people are going to want to use RJ Barrett near the top of the salary range. He's only 7,600, but due to just how popular he'll be, I think I want to go well above that for my priority. So I'll just pick Giannis. This isn't really that strange of a pick or anything like that, but I do think this is a slate where we see a lot of the highest owned players in the $7,000, $8,000 ranges. Giannis is a lot more expensive than that. The thing he has going for him that helps the most, I think, is that Chris Middleton is out of the lineup today. Giannis is on the injury report, but he's probable. Middleton is out for this game. So a little more usage for Giannis, a little more for him to do just in all sorts of offensive things. And then the Bulls are on the second leg of a back-to-back. So I think this is actually a pretty good matchup for Giannis. And then the one good defensive player that the Bulls have is Alex Caruso. I think he probably winds up playing on Drew Holiday for most of the game. I don't think that he's really well equipped to guard Giannis. That's probably Patrick Williams or Derek Jones or someone like that. So I think overall this just sets up really well for Giannis. I think paying up for him makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Nick, when you're looking on DraftKings, you got Jokic at 12,400, Giannis at 12,100, Trae Young at 10,400. Then you have 5 players who are out. Then you jump down to DeMar DeRozan at 8,600. So where are you going? Are you going to pay all the way up for one of those top 3 guys, or are you jumping down to that 8K range?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt's on the right track with Giannis. You take Chris Middleton away. There are some stars in the league where you take away their complementary piece and you maybe worry about, what kind of responsibility that puts on their shoulders, and some guys press in that situation. With Giannis, it's kind of the opposite. You feel better about him, I think, as a DFS option, the less help he has around him. So I think if I'm deciding between he and Jokic at the top, I would lean toward Giannis tonight. But I do like a few options in that kind of upper middle range where you have Trae Young at 10,400 going up against the New York Knicks at the Garden. We, of course, know that Trae Young loves playing at that venue. He's basically been a one-man show. We have no idea if or when John Collins is going to come back. And it's been kind of rough, game to game. You don't know what you're getting from the Atlanta Hawks, but you can pretty much count on Trae Young whenever he's healthy to have a pretty huge night. He had those back-to-back 47 and 46-point games last week. He's obviously capable of that on any given night. So I like Trae Young at 10-4, and then DeRozan at 8,600, pretty decent price, given what he's proven capable of earlier this season. And even Klay Thompson at 8,100, he took 22 shots the other night with Steph Curry out. Doesn't do a whole lot outside of scoring in threes. That's a concern, but kind of the featured potential number 1 option now in that offense the rest of the regular season.
All right, where are you finding DFS value tonight, Nick, if you're going to be paying all the way up for Giannis?
So first, I like DeAndre Hunter at 5,000. I think that's just a bargain for a guy who plays a lot of minutes and does a lot of things, especially with Collins out. But there are 2 guys on the New York Knicks, and with Julius Randle ruled out of this game tonight, I think it opens things up for Jericho Sims, who's down at $3,100. Nerlens Noel has been MIA for a month and a half at this point. I don't think he's going to randomly come back tonight. So Jericho Sims could be looking at, up certainly north of 20 minutes, perhaps even north of 25 minutes. He played 21 minutes with Randle in the lineup against Utah on Sunday. He had a 23 DraftKings point game last week. Obviously, you're not expecting huge things here, but for a guy who's essentially a minimum price, I think there's a chance that he overproduces pretty well tonight.
All right, Matt, where are you finding DFS value?
So yeah, I'm looking to the Knicks also. This is a situation that we certainly have to care about with Julius Randle not playing, as Nick said. I think Obi Toppin is the guy that most people are going to want. I like the Jericho Sims call, but I think my favorite plays from the Knicks are going to be at guard, where if you're fading RJ Barrett, which I do think is a reasonable move to make in large field tournaments, you want to play another guard on the team who would maybe benefit if Barrett is in foul trouble or just having a poor game. So I like Alec Burks at 5,600. I think he's sort of a value play. I mean, this isn't as cheap of a price as some other Knicks guys, but he could get lost in the shuffle a little bit as far as DFS ownership, where you have a couple of Knicks guys that are $3,000 and then Barrett, who's more expensive than Burks. And I think that that's where the popular plays really come from, with Toppin and Barrett being 1 and 2 as the priority. So Burks in the middle and then Evan Fournier to a lesser extent. But I do think that if you're making DFS lineups tonight, you need to have at least one Knicks player in there, because just how much usage opens up without Randle is really a big deal.
All right, to the sports book now. Matt, which team do you like to cover the spread tonight? That Warriors Magic game has the largest one on the slate.
Well, I'll just stick to the game that we're already talking about. I like the Knicks +3, and there are a couple situations in the NBA this year where players that are generally considered to be pretty good and perhaps even the best players on their teams are not nearly as good as people think because they accumulate a lot of counting stats, but they're not very efficient. So we saw this the other night. Kyle Kuzma didn't play for the Wizards. The Lakers wound up favored in the game, and the Wizards won anyway. And I think Kuzma, when he plays, makes the team worse because he has the ball the whole game and he doesn't pass. Julius Randle maybe is not exactly the same because he does pass a little bit, but I do think the Knicks are better off without him. I think they have plenty of good players that just don't get the shots because Randle always has the ball, or he dribbles around for 21 seconds and they get it right at the end of the shot clock and their shot quality is worse. So not having Randle is not a big deal. This line was +1 this morning. Now it's +3. To me, that's just 2 free points that we're getting because Randle doesn't really matter. And now the Knicks are underdogs by 2 more than they would have been otherwise.
And the Hawks have failed to cover the spread in each of their last 6 road games. So, Nick, which team do you like to cover?
Yeah, I think Matt is on the right track there. Not only has Atlanta, riding that 6-game, ATS loss streak, but they're the worst team in the league against the spread on the road this season by a pretty good margin. They're 10-24 ATS in away games. So it's not like the Knicks have been a juggernaut covering at home either, but it's a pretty stark comparison when you look at Atlanta's home and road splits. I think the Julius Randle point stands. He's a guy who puts up a lot of counting stats, but ultimately he's been mostly healthy this year, and the Knicks are probably going to miss the playoffs. But they are, I think, 5 games back of this Atlanta team for that 10 spot in the East. I mean, again, chances are they're not going to catch them. Overwhelmingly unlikely. But if you're the Knicks and you're convincing yourself, hey, we still have a chance at this play-in, you absolutely have to win this game tonight. So maybe there's a little extra juice in the Garden for the Knicks. I'll trail Matt here and go Knicks +3 at home.
All right, let's talk about game totals. Any that you're eyeing today, Nick? I mean, that Hawks-Knicks game has the highest one, 226.5.
I'd be tempted to go under on that, but I really like the under on Warriors Magic, and it's a low number. It's at 215. I do feel like I'm being baited into it a little bit. The no Curry factor, I think, looms large, especially for Golden State. But even with Steph in the lineup since the All-Star break, this has essentially been a league average offense. They're 13th in offensive rating over the last 15 games. Obviously, Orlando, not a great team on either end, but both of these teams can D up. And since the All-Star break, Orlando's actually been a better defense than Golden State. They both rank in the top half of the league. I think this is just kind of a feel it out game for the Warriors, where you're playing your second game now without Steph Curry. They're trying to figure out what is the new hierarchy. Is Jordan Poole the number 1 guy? Is it Klay Thompson? Where does Draymond fit? And then on the other side of this, you have the Magic, who just put up 90 points against OKC in their last game on Sunday. So I think this is a game that Golden State finds a way to win, but it's not exactly a pretty one.
All right, Matt, looking at these game totals, what do we think?
Yeah, I'll just keep talking about the same game. I do like the undercall in Orlando Golden State, but I'm going to stick with this Knicks-Hawks game. And the other thing that I didn't mention when it comes to the spread is Bogdan Bogdanovic, who may not be playing for this game. And if he's out, especially, I like the under. I kind of lean that way anyway, but if you take him off the court, it's not that he's an unbelievable offensive player. I think he's a pretty good one. But DeLon Wright is the backup there, and I think he could be the one who picks up those minutes. DeLon Wright is a really good defender and probably the best defender as far as guards are concerned on this Hawks team. So part of the reason I always like the under when Trae Young doesn't play, yes, it's because Trae Young is amazing at offense and not so good at defense. And when you remove him, the team just has less points scored on both ends. But part of that is DeLon Wright's effect, where he is a defense-first player. So switching from Bogey to DeLon Wright would be a pretty good bump for the under. So I'm kind of just interested in that news for that bet there.
All right, good stuff, guys. That'll do it for the NBA, but the fun continues on the ice. This one, we will be right back to break down the biggest trade deals in the NHL. The NHL trade deadline has come and gone, so it's time to pass judgment on the winners and losers of some of these deals. Here to do that is RotoWire's Paul Bruno and AJ Scholes, along with host of the Fantasy on Ice podcast for NHL.com, Pete Jensen. So, Paul, which player who changed teams will see the biggest boost in fantasy value?
I'll give you three of them to think about, Jesse. Claude Giroux, obviously the clear choice. A second-line center spot next to Jonathan Huberdeau. That's not a bad landing spot to get next to the NHL's leading point getter, and I think he's going to thrive there. Rickard Rakell, a second-line right wing next to Evgeny Malkin. I'm sure that's going to make AJ smile for a while. That's a great addition. And then Frankie Vetrano, a guy who's been scoring a depth role for the last couple of seasons. He now moves up to a second-line situation in New York with guys like Panarin and Strome beside him. That's also a pretty good setup.
All right, what do we think? Who's going to see the biggest boost in fantasy value, AJ?
Well, for me, it's actually Marcus Johansson joining the Caps. I think that's a huge boost for his fantasy value, especially considering they had him on the top line with Ovechkin and Kuznetsov this morning, in addition to joining up with the number 2 power play unit. Look, with Seattle, he was producing at an okay rate, but you look at his career in 7 years in Washington, he averaged 0.58 points per game, compared to 0.47 in his 5 other stops around the league. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he gets a look with power play 1. So Johansson, for me, biggest upgrade there. And look, I'll toss in a Terry Lehkonen. Like, he went from the Habs to the Abs. Like, that move speaks for itself.
All right, Pete, what do you think?
Very good points about all those guys so far. I especially like Rakell if he plays with Evgeny Malkin, but I'll go with Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean, he goes from a team on the Blackhawks that was not very good this season, but he still had 4 shutouts for them and was close to 500 with a decent save percentage. We know how good Fleury is when he's on one of the elite teams, and I do believe Minnesota is one of those elite teams. Their goaltending just kind of was shaky the past month or so and fell by the wayside, so give Bill Guerin some credit. He addressed their biggest weakness. Now they're going to be going into the playoffs, even with Cam Talbot having a shutout last night after the trade, which is a good sign, by the way, right? That'll elevate the whole level of play for all the goaltenders involved on that team. But I fully expect Fleury to start game 1 of the playoffs, and they'll ride him as far as the Western Conference Final, maybe even the Cup Final if things go on their side. But I do think Fleury gives the Wild a much higher ceiling, futures-wise, and then fantasy-wise, Fleury gets a big bump. I think he's a top 10 fantasy goalie once again.
All right, how about a player that stayed on their team, right, but it's going to benefit from an arrival or perhaps even a departure, AJ?
I think Jake DeBrusk staying with Boston is the best thing for him right now in terms of fantasy value. Look, Bergeron is still out, could periodically miss time. And look, there's no guarantee Boston would have sent him somewhere where he could have stayed in the top 6. Realistically, I think he would have ended up on a third-line option for a lot of teams. So as far as guys who stayed, I think DeBrusk keeps his value there. Guys that are going to benefit, Paul alluded to this, Evgeny Malkin has gotten the biggest uptick in supporting cast with the addition of Rakell. He was producing despite playing with Danton Heinen and the struggling Kasperi Kapanen. With Rakell on his wing, you have to imagine we'll see a lot more production out of Gino. If there's one maybe negative you want to find there, he's probably not going to need to register 8 shots a night like he has for the last 2 games. So maybe his floor drops a little bit, but I would expect the assists will significantly tick up here.
Pete, who sticks out to you?
I'll go with a couple of guys we haven't mentioned so far. Vincent Trojek, contract year. I didn't expect him to be traded, but it was good to see the Hurricanes upgrade their forward group. In addition to re-signing Kokoniemi, they brought in Max Domi, who's had a very high fantasy ceiling in the past. So wouldn't be surprised if Trojek sees a little bump from that. And then, you know, some of these other guys out there, I think like Charlie McAvoy is going to be a big beneficiary from having Hampus Lindholm on the first pair. Not that we were expecting, McAvoy to be anywhere other than Boston, but just the fact that they went out and addressed that defense. McAvoy has stuck out to me over the years as one of the biggest workhorses at the defenseman position with very little support around him. So now they bring in a guy that's done some good things in his career, and I think will benefit largely from a change of scenery in Hampus Lindholm.
All right, Paul, a player that stayed on their team but's going to benefit from an arrival or a departure. What do you think?
Two youngsters now get better opportunities with their respective teams. I'm looking at Morgan Frost in Philadelphia. This guy was a first-round draft pick not so long ago. He's been trying to get a chance in Philadelphia. And now with Giroux's departure, he steps into a top 6 role, and I think he's going to thrive there and be a long-term fixture there. That's how good I think he is. And then Taro Hirose in Detroit, they've made kind of a changeover in the Red Wings forward ranks in the last couple of years, and he's going to be a part of it now too. Similar profile to Frost. He was trying to get some traction in the top 6 role, but he was blocked. And now Nemesnikov's out of the way, and that paves his way to in there. And then another guy on the third line in Tampa is Ross Colton. He now has new line mates of Nick Paul and Brandon Hagel. And the Bolts are a team that looks very scary. Again, ready to defend and go for their 3rd Stanley Cup in a row. And the strength of that team was its depth, and now they got a better third line than they had even at that point.
Okay, big picture, Pete. Which team improved the most following this year's deadline? What do you think?
I got to say the Florida Panthers. I mean, they addressed a couple of their needs. They're really one of the deepest teams on paper that I've ever seen in my time covering the NHL. They got 5 different guys in their top 9 forward group, including Claude Giroux, who could play the center position at a very high level, which is amazing for them heading into the postseason. And even when you look at Aaron Ekblad being out longer term after his injury this past week, they addressed their defense with Ben Sherratt. You already know that Mackenzie Weegar is going to be able to fill in really well for Ekblad in the short term. And they have Spencer Knight playing really well for them with this recent absence of Bobrovsky. So when I look at winners of the deadline, Florida was already one of the deepest, if not the deepest, fantasy teams in the league. And they went out and got an elite player in Claude Giroux and also some insurance on defense with Sherratt. So to me, they hit a home run at this deadline. The past calendar year for the Florida Panthers, dating back to when they got Sam Reinhart too, that team just continuously improves month after month. So it's been good to see, and we'll see if they can knock off those Tampa Bay Lightning in the playoffs if they cross paths again.
Haha, we will see. Paul, which team improved the most following this year's deadline if you had to pick one?
I said the answer yesterday. These guys didn't hear it, Jesse. You might want to roll that tape, but I went with the Atlantic Division. All 4 teams improved themselves dramatically. That's quite an arms race for a group that includes 4 teams in the NHL's top 8 in the overall standings. I can't wait for the first 2 rounds in these playoffs, and my focus will definitely be there. They are all outstanding clubs. They all improved.
All right, AJ, what do you think?
It's got to be the Panthers. I mean, Pete is so right here. Like, Giroux adds to that already deep forward group. And again, according to today's morning skate, he's going to be on the top line with Verhaeghe and Barkov. In fact, they're so stacked with forward talent right now that I practiced today for the power play. They just put 5 forwards on the number 1 power play unit with Ekblad out. Obviously, when he comes back, that'll change. But it has to be the Panthers. And look, I'll give a nod to Anaheim here. They've now got to combine 8 picks in the first 2 rounds over the next 2 drafts. They're going to have a ton of cap space here. So I think they did really well here, kind of selling off, building for the future. Although some of that does depend on what the outcome is of the Dadonov debacle after they traded for a guy that they can't apparently have because he doesn't want to go there. So we'll see how all that plays out. But even without that, I think they did a really good job.
All right, now let's get real here. Which trade did you dislike the most? Maybe because of the fit, the return, or the lack of impact, Paul?
You hit on it right away, and I'm going to surprise AJ because I talked glowingly about this guy 2 weeks ago. Then I started watching him play. I'm talking about Max Domi to Carolina. I don't know that there's any other conclusion with this player that to say that he's copped an attitude that has prevented him from being the same player he was in junior, a skilled guy who plays with an edge. I thought he was a physical force in this league, but I started to look at his numbers. He has 15 hits on the season. That's 1-5. That's 1 more than Willie Nylander, and his scoring has kept him in a third-line role much of the season on a bad Columbus club. I think Coach Brindamore will be challenged to get more out of him. This will be this will go one of 2 ways, and it could be a disaster in the dressing room too. So I don't know about this look in Carolina for Domi.
All right, AJ, where are you going with this one?
Well, I guarantee you if the Leafs had traded for Domi, he would be singing a different tune. It would have been the best acquisition that has ever happened in the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs. There's no way he would have said a bad word about Dome if he had gotten his way and traded for him. But look,
drama.
If anybody says anything other than the Travis Hamonic deal, you're kidding yourself. Like, they gave up a third-round pick for a guy that Canucks were trying to offload. He's way overpaid at $3 million a year, which you're on hook for next year, too, for a guy that hasn't hit the 20-point threshold since 2015-16, and he's not getting any faster. The other one I'll throw out here is St. Louis. I'm not sure Nick Leddy is the addition they needed on the blue line. There were a ton of other defensemen that were traded that could have been a better fit here. And not only that, but they gave up a depth guy in Oscar Sundqvist when they probably actually needed to add some forward depth here. So you don't get the right blue liner. You give up too much here. I didn't love the St. Louis Blues day either.
All right, Pete, which trade did you dislike the most?
Well, I definitely respect what Paul said, and I agree that, like, technically everybody in the Atlantic got better, but I think Florida got a lot better. Tampa got a little bit better. Boston got a lot better, and Toronto got just slightly better. I was really surprised that Toronto didn't address the goaltending position, especially after that kind of fiasco with waiving Peter Mrazek, and they were playing Shalgren, but then he got lit up over the weekend. They didn't address their goaltending really, even with some decent rentals out there to try to pursue, whether it was Korpisalo or, Craig Anderson. I think they all might have been a good short-term stopgap and potentially more if they worked out. Instead, they got Mark Giordano, who's a nice player, reunites with TJ Brody, but he's 38 years old, and the best production of his career is way in the rearview mirror, let's be honest. So, I'm just a little puzzled by the Maple Leafs because they're kind of a win now team, right? If it's not now, it's never. The window was only slightly open in recent years, and now it may be closing. So I thought they should have done a little bit more in the goaltending front, to be honest. And I think the Giordano trade is maybe a little overrated in fantasy.
All right, well, let's sneak in a question about tonight's NHL DFS slate. All right, we got 11 games to choose from, so just who's your favorite play on the slate, AJ?
Well, I'm going to add some breaking news to this one because it wasn't totally clear, but Rickard Rakell is going to play for the Penguins tonight. He was obviously traveling from far away. He's been dealing with an injury, but he's going to be in the lineup. So you're going to get a guy that's going to play on Evgeny Malkin's wing for $2,500. It's an absolute steal here. Marcus Johansson, who I talked about earlier, comes in at just $3,000, top line guy for them as well. I think both of these are your clear value plays tonight. And then you can spend up in other spots. Maybe you go with Oshie or with Ovechkin rather to go with Johansson. You could double up and go with Malkin and Rakell. I think both of those would be great plays to kind of go high-low and stack some teams tonight.
All right, Pete, what do you think? Favorite play on the slate?
Another team that stood pat at the deadline for the most part, as far as big names, is the Edmonton Oilers, but they've been playing well lately. I like what that offense is up to, especially with how Evander Kane's been playing. But look at Tyson Barry. I mean, this looks like the Tyson Barry from last year when he led all defensemen in scoring for the season. Was off to a slow start, coaching change. Now he's back on power play one with McDavid and Draisaitl and Evander Kane. Three guys that are elite fantasy forwards. Yes, even Kane has been a great story since joining the Oilers from the Sharks after that whole situation. But Tyson Barry has a bunch of multi-point games lately, 12 points, 8 on the power play in his past 11 games. Sign me up for Tyson Barry, even on the road against Dallas. I think he's also due for his first road goal of the season. With how well he's been playing, wouldn't be surprised if that came tonight.
Paul, 11 games. Who is your favorite play on the slate?
Well, I'm looking at the teams versus one another here on puck line bets. So I'm looking at the Rangers and the Jets to beat up on their opponents. The New Jersey Devils won't make the playoffs. They've got a nice looking team, but the Rangers are one of the elite clubs in the league. That's going to be a nice payoff at plus 155. And I like the Jets over a Vegas club that is just stumbling into the finish line. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, and Jets look like they're fighting for their lives. So I'm going to be on them, hoping that they can pull off the win minus 1.5 to get me a 155 payoff there.
All right, good stuff, guys. That is it for hockey. We're going to continue our MLB divisional breakdowns after this quick break. out to our MLB panel, DraftKings contributors Steve Buchanan and Nick Fryer. Fellas, it is time for our divisional breakdowns to continue here on The Sweat. So yesterday we did the NL West. Today it's on to the AL West. And of course, the only place to start is with Steve's favorite team, the Seattle Mariners. Mariners are plus 450 to win the AL West behind the Astros and the Angels. So Steve, make your case for why this is the best bet to win the division.
Make my case. What case is there to make? It's pretty obvious. This is the best bet in the AL West. Why? Because the Astros are also in the division. Let's just be honest here. Nobody wants to come out and admit it, but the Astros are not as good as of a team as they were last year. I mean, what are they going to be relying upon? Justin Verlander, what's he, 45 years old now? Lance McCullers already injured to start the season. So now, there's two starting pitchers with question marks, and then you got a lot of young guns there in the back of the rotation. There's no more Carlos Correa either, one of the best bats in the middle of that lineup. So you have the Mariners making all of these moves. Winker, Suarez, Robbie Ray, that guy who won the Cy Young last year, 80-1. We all remember that. I don't need to remind you. This team is loading up, and then they have one of the best farm systems in all of the league. Julio Rodriguez hasn't even stepped foot on an MLB field. He's going to do that later this year. That lineup is going to smash from top to bottom. The pitching staff striking out every single batter that they're going to get. Plus 450, it's a steal. You missed it at 6-1. I already got that because I don't have to brag about that. Plus 450, get it now.
Steve is passionate. Nick, what's your take?
Yeah, well, I think Steve decided to neglect the fact that Yordan Alvarez is still in Houston, Jose Altuve, Alex
Always
Bregman,
injured. Cheater.
Yuli Gurriel, Kyle Tucker, and sure, Verlander. Kyle Tucker was a guy we talked about all last season because he was always underpriced on DraftKings because he was always playing way out of his range anyways. But yeah, Justin Verlander and McCullers, and I know McCullers is the injury and everything, and Verlander's coming off one too. Yeah, these are not guys they're not the guys that they used to be, but this pitching staff is still rock solid. You still have a very good lineup, and I love the Jesse Winker move. I think the Mariners had the best offseason of any team between Winker and Ray. Of course, you still got Haniger there and quite a few other guys, don't get me wrong. But I still think the best bet for them is to bet on them to make the postseason at plus 165. I think this one is a can't-miss bet. I will say I don't know how the Angels are ahead of the Mariners when it comes to the odds. That's a little ridiculous.
All right, well, we've got the reigning AL MVP in this division. Shohei Ohtani is the favorite to win the award once again. He's plus 350. Right behind him, his teammate Mike Trout at plus 400. It seems ridiculous that a team with these two players on it struggles to make the playoffs, but here we are again, LA, plus 150 to make it. So, Nick, can they do it this year?
I mean, maybe, but I don't feel good about this team. I understand that you're getting Mike Trout back after you're without him pretty much the entire season. It's weird to think that, we look at basketball, and if you have two guys like this on the same team, it's like, yeah, of course they're making the postseason and they might make a title run. Baseball's different. It's part of why I love the game. But yeah, when we look at the MVP odds too, I mean, Ohtani getting it back to back, I don't really like that. I mean, I can't remember the last time. I was trying to look it up when the last time that happened. I thought Trout had done it for some reason. And I know there are some voters who are like, Trout is the best player in baseball. Well, now Shohei Ohtani kind of falls under that umbrella because he pitches as well. So I could see it going either way with these two guys. I could also see votes getting pulled, them pulling votes from one another too, because they're on the same team, impacting the lineup on all that. So I don't like voting on betting on either one of them or at least Ohtani to win MVP. I think Trout's the better bet there. And I don't like betting on them to make the postseason.
Steve, plus 150 to make the postseason. What do we think?
You can't rely upon this team at all. It's a sham that they have Ohtani and Trout because they're just being wasted in their prime years. This team has absolutely no pitching. It seems to be the common theme in the AL West, except for the Mariners, because they're the only smart team in the league. They have no pitching at all. They have a very, very injury-prone lineup, and they're relying on a lot of guys that are unproven. What are we going to get out of guys like Joe Adell? What are we going to get out of guys like David Fletcher or Max Stassi? These are all guys that they're relying upon in their starting lineup, and they're really unproven, or they don't have a solid track record. So it's going to be on Trout and Ohtani. Even though the playoffs are expanded, It doesn't mean anything good for the Angels. I don't know how they're ahead in terms of the Mariners, who are going to be the winners of this division. So that's why I do, great odds. So that's fine. If DK wants to settle like that, fine. Be a bunch of losers at the end of the season when we're cashing our bets. That's their problem, not mine. I don't see how they're ahead. They have nothing on this team that makes me feel that they're going to be the ones that are going to either make the playoffs or even win this division. It's a sham.
Last back-to-back MVP was Miguel Cabrera in 2012 and 2013, just to note.
Good research.
Thank you. That was from our producer, Slates. But thank you. I'll take the credit. So let's talk about last year's AL champs, the Houston Astros. Steve already waxed poetic about them. They lost one of their star players, Carlos Correa. He signed with the Twins, leaving the team he took to 3 World Series, won one with. They're still the favorite in the division, and the sportsbook has their win total set at 91.5. So is it no Correa, no problem for Houston, or will the struggle to reach this number continue? Steve, you think that they're going to struggle?
I do think they're going to struggle. I think the loss of Correa is really going to be large because, Nick brought up Yordan Alvarez. Look, he's probably one of the best hitters on the field in that division. When he's healthy, he has not proven that he can stay healthy. He's kind of like a Fernando Tatis Jr. When he's at the plate, he's going to absolutely smash the baseball. But most of the time, he is on the sidelines. They also don't have really anybody to come up and take over Correa's spot. Bregman's another year older, or Altuve is another year older. They do have some young guys in the outfield that maybe can kind of, limit that loss of Correa. But that lineup is not as strong as we've seen it before. And I think people are going to slowly start realize that as the season goes on. The benefit for the Astros is that there are teams that they can beat up on in this division, with the Rangers, with the Angels. That's where it stops. But that is where they're going to find their success. I think that, 91 wins is a nice number, but I think they're going to just make it there. I don't think they're going to go over that number.
All right, Nick, you brought up that they still have a bunch of weapons. So do you think they're going to struggle to reach this number, or it will happen for them?
I think Steve's right that it's going to be close, but I do feel comfortable in saying that they're going to go over 91.5 wins because, talk about the Rangers, the Angels, and the A's. I mean, there are 3 teams that I don't take seriously in any capacity. I know that the A's won 86 games last year in a division where you still had 2 90-win teams, but I question whether we're going to see 3 teams go over 500 this season in that division. And then you look at the rest of the AL too. I mean, that's going to help the Astros out. There's some pretty weak teams over in the Central Division too, and I only see them so much, but picking on that as well. And yes, a lot of these guys are a year older. That's great math on your part, Steve. That's usually how it works. But still, does that mean that these guys are all going to see a decline over the course of this year? I don't think so. Okay, great. Well, so everybody gets older every year, and then they usually get worse. That's how it works. Duly noted. But still, I look at these guys, and I still see a quality lineup, a proven lineup, guys that have been, have know what it takes to go in the distance for the entire season. So yes, I think that 91.5 wins over that is definitely within reach.
All right, got to pick up the pace on these last 2 questions, guys. The Texas Rangers were one of the busiest teams pre-lockout, bringing in Corey Seager on a massive deal, infielder Marcus Semien to join him. The lineup looks like it could be solid, but they may still have some holes in the pitching staff. So their team win total for Texas is set at 74.5. Going over or under, Steve?
Holes in the pitching staff? The whole pitching staff is a hole. It's a black hole, and nobody's going to be able to get out of it. When John Gray is your ace of the staff, you've got some issues, okay? You have a lot of work that needs to be done. This Rangers team, I'll tell you what to bet on. The over in all of their games, because they're going to go over. They're going to score 9 runs a game. They're going to allow 14 runs per game. Under on the win total, because they're going to score a ton of runs, maybe even lead the league in runs scored. They're also going to lead the league in runs allowed. To over 2,000. That's my guess. Over 2,000.
All right, Nick, what do you think?
He's going to put it any better. But I will say that you should go with the under on this one. I was thinking over when you talk about Semien and Seager, as much as their pitching staff is brutal. But then I look at what they did last year, 60 wins. And I do always question Seager's health going into a season. There's no way that even if he's healthy, he's going to go up and make up for 15 wins. And I don't think that he's going to be healthy the entire season just because usually what he deals with. So yeah, I'm going to go with the under on this one.
All right, Nick, finally the fire sale that is the Oakland Athletics. Matt Chapman and Matt Olson are gone. It looks like others could be on their way out the door as well. Oakland is tearing it down to the studs, so we're going to turn our attention to their fantasy outlook because the team as a whole probably isn't going anywhere this season. So who should we keep an eye on for some fantasy value on this team?
Yeah, I mean, and you lose what? Harrison's gone, Moreland, Lowry, Marte, Canna. I mean, it's just ridiculous what they've done, but this is what the A's do. And I'm looking at that lineup and I'm like, well, we want fantasy value here. I mean, you're going to have to figure out a couple of these guys early in the season, but I would think right now the only two that jump out to me are Seth Brown and Sean Murphy, and it's like still with them. 111 games last year for Seth Brown, 20 home runs, 13 doubles. Sean Murphy kind of the inverse, similar amount of games. So those are the only two guys that I'm looking at early on in the season. Maybe we'll see what happens in spring training, but right now I don't see many people rostering the A's early on.
Steve, what do you think?
You're not rostering anybody. Who do you even recognize on this team? You know, you should be looking at when they start doing the call-ups in the minor leagues. Guys like Tyler Soderstrom might be able to come up this year because they have absolutely nobody. The A's are going to be a team that you're going to consistently stack against because they're going to be trading both of their starters that are really left in Frankie Montas and Sean Manaea. They're not even going to be on the team probably come the All-Star break. You are staying far, far away from Oakland. Make sure to stack against them because this team, you want to talk about tearing it down to the studs? They're down to the foundation. And the foundation is just a team named Oakland Athletics. That's all they have left. Everybody is gone. Stack against this team. Oakland Athletics stinks. Nick can't contain himself. He's having a great time.
Steve is absolutely on a roll today. Absolutely crushing
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you for ending the
You look
baseball
great.
segment. Thank you so much. I feel like a garbage can. Thank you for ending the baseball segment on such a high note. We're going to talk PGA hockey. We're talking PGA next. One more block to go. Final block of the show. We made it, everybody. Let me intro our PGA panel. It's just Jeff. DraftKings contributor Jeff Ulrich here for Match Madness. So we're previewing the WGC Dell Technologies Match Play event this week at Austin Country Club in Texas. We call it Match Madness because this week is a bracket-style format with a 64-player field divided into 16 four-man pools. So you face each member of your pool once, and the player with the best record advances. DraftKings lets you bet on each group and which golfer will come out. So let's start with your favorite top seed from their group to advance out. So this is someone seeded 1 through 16, Jeff.
Right. So, I mean, when you're betting on these, obviously you have to factor in the odds. I mean, like I mentioned this yesterday, but the top seeds in the group stage last year really didn't have a good record. So the odds are going to be a big factor here. If we're just looking at this, you know, without odds and saying whose group do I like the most, it's probably Xander Schofley. He's sitting at plus 125 in Group 7. He's got an out-of-form Tony Finau. He's got Lucas Herbert and Takeyomo Kanea. Yeah, I mean, you can look him up if you want. Those are the three players he's got this week in his pod. Xander Schofley's never posted a losing record in the pod stage group in 3 previous attempts at this event. And he's never won his pod, but this is easily the best draw he's ever had. So the odds aren't great on Schofley, but I would be kind of shocked if he didn't pull off the win there. I think for the top seeds, the best value you're getting is probably Victor Hovland at plus 165. Again, I mean, you know, I don't necessarily want to go heavy on these top seeds when we're betting group stages, but Hovland also, he's got Will Zalatoris, who might be one of the worst putters on the PGA Tour, and then Cameron Tringale and Sepp Straka. Hovland at plus 165 actually looks like a pretty solid value there. So he's probably my favorite top seed just to bet. Again, you know, factoring in the odds and everything.
Somewhere, Reed Fowler's ears just perked up when he heard out-of-form Tony Finau. How about someone seated higher than those top 16 to escape their group?
Yeah, I got a couple players I really like this week. And this is really where I think you should be starting betting cards if you're looking at the group stage. You know, just looking at those players just under the top seeds. Guys who may be coming in with a little bit more momentum, a little bit more to play for this week, simply from the fact that maybe their eyes won't be as focused on Augusta as some of the top players. Max Homa at plus 230 in Group 8, going up against Dustin Johnson. Dustin's had like one good start this year. Max Homa's been top 20 in his last 4 events. He's striking the ball magnificently, if we're being honest, plus 7 strokes gained in ball striking each of his last 2 starts. And he's got Matthew Wolff, who is completely lost on the golf course right now, and Mackenzie Hughes to round out that group. Max Homa went 2-1 at this event last year at plus 230. I love him in a group bet. And then Russell Henley too. I mean, look, people are going to get mad at me for bringing up Russell Henley again, but this dude has been, T13 his last 2 starts. He's plus 220. He's actually the favorite over Joaquin Niemann in this group. Joaquin Niemann is the higher seed. Henley, the favorite, though, at plus 220. Those are fine odds because he's really just got to beat Niemann. He's got Kevin Na, who's been taking care of his new child over the last couple weeks. Trust me, that's tiresome. And then he's got Maverick McNeely to deal with, too. I think Henley at plus 220 is also a good bet.
All right, Jeff, let's focus in on one group in particular. Group 9's top seed is Bryson DeChambeau, who we haven't seen since January as he continues to battle wrist and hip issues. Now, his overall odds to win the tournament are plus 4,000. Like, is that high enough to entice you at all, or would you just totally stay away because of the unknown?
So I would probably rather bet Bryson as like a top 16 or a top 4 bet this week than bet on him to win. Simply, just a little bit of the fatigue factor, a little bit of the unknown. But this is a pretty good event, I think, at least in my opinion, for someone to be coming back from injury. And one thing we have seen with Bryson over his career is he's gone off for long stretches and come back. And when he's come back, he's been right in form. Like, he won the Shriners off like a 2-month break from golf. This is a little bit different because it's injury related. We know that. But I can pretty much guarantee you Bryson isn't coming back unless he's really, really thinks he can win. And look, he said he was going to come back at the Arnold Palmer, and he stopped his comeback short because he didn't think he was ready. I think there is value in Bryson this week, and I certainly would target him in this group. He's got Richard Bland. Again, you can look up that name yourself. Taylor Gooch, who missed the cut badly in his last start, and then, like a almost 50-year-old Lee Westwood. This is a very winnable group. I'm not necessarily interested in Bryson taking down this whole thing, but for DFS purposes at 9,300, don't forget, you get a lot of points if your players wins big. And I think if Bryson comes in and plays even like 90% here, he could win a couple of these matches by big margins. So I'm looking at him as a very nice DFS value at 9,300. And I do like him at this group. I think the fact you're getting over plus 200 odds, very good value there for Bryson.
All right, Jeff, who is your pick to win the whole thing?
I really like Max Homa this week at plus 6,000 last time I looked in the outright odds. He's going to be my long shot, but I'll go a little bit more chalky. We're going to go with Xander Schofley up front. This dude is just overdue to win a tournament. He likes the WGC formats. Like I said, he's got an underrated match play record as well. And I think he's got the easiest path of any of the top seeds to get into the top 16 stage. So Xander Schofley flying a little bit under the radar this year so far, but I think everything sets up well. Again, he's got good experience at this event. Never had a losing record in the pod stage. And I think that you're probably getting some decent outright odds on him as well on the DraftKings Sportsbook. He's sitting at around plus 2,000 right now, which I really don't hate. So I'm going to make Xander Schofley my pick to win.
Excellent work, Jeff. Thank you so much. That is a show. Madden starts at noon, so stay tuned for that. The slate is going to be on at 5 p.m., and I will be back tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for another edition of The Sweat. See you then.